So I'm David Mitch, I'm chair of the economics department, and this is sort of one of our early stages in our Sloan Foundation funded project, which is basically the overall aim of the project is to establish more of a pipeline for underrepresented minorities to pursue doctoral programs in economics. But it's not just restricted to underrepresented minorities in general. We want to make known what the opportunities are. And I think one of the things suggested by the title, beyond sort of greed, people often associate economics and financial economics with more pursuing money-making opportunities and so on. And I think one of the themes is that there's public service and social dimensions to what can be done with doctoral work in economics. In fact, just a number of articles in today's Post about things going on where economists are been involved in debate. There's debate I just saw in this morning's Post regarding the AT&T merger, and two dueling economists, Carl Shapiro from Berkeley and Dennis Carlton from University of Chicago, debating whether or not this is going to be good for consumers or not. That's just sort of one of a number of ways in which economists can play a role in current debates. And to do that, one first of all has to do doctoral work in economics and know about those opportunities, and that requires preparation at a fairly early stage. So the idea of this sort of workshop or session is simply to make known to people what the opportunities are for pursuing doctoral work in economics and the later careers that one can pursue. So we are very pleased to have with us today both, we have Jessica Goldberg, who we think is about to get tenure at College Park. And that's no mean accomplishment. So she's going to talk more about the academic side of it and academic careers and so on, and also a little bit about what's involved in actually being able to get into a competitive doctoral program in economics. And then we have a number of people who are going to talk more about the public service side of things. So Sandeli Watre will follow up and talk about, she's been with the IMF now about a year, I think, International Monetary Fund about a year, and talk about sort of that dimension of things. We have some speakers here from the Federal Reserve that will talk about that side of things. We have a few representatives from Brookings. They'll talk about sort of the Brookings think tank aspect, and we actually also have Daniel Bunn here from the Joint Economics Commission, right? from the congressional side of things. So we have a variety of perspectives to. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things first. Oh, actually, what I do want to do, I'd like to just, I'd appreciate it if people could just put your name and email address on here, just so we have a record of who's here. But anyway, let me turn things over to Jessica.
Super. All right. Thank you so much for having me here. My name is Jessica Goldberg, and I am pretty sure that I have the coolest job in the world. So I'm a development economist. I'm a professor of economics at the University of Maryland, and I'm not going to tell you so much about what I do as how I got to do it, but I will give you just kind of the short preview of why I think my job is so cool. I get to teach, I get to work with amazing students, and I get to do research that really helps me contribute to what we know about the world and how we make it better. So as a development economist, I am working primarily on financial inclusion in developing countries. That means that I am working with governments and banks on ways to design financial products like savings accounts, insurance products, loan products that are useful to particularly households living in rural areas in southeastern Africa. And I do research, I write academic papers, but then I also work with people who are in the position to actually do something. Like, here's the result of the research, how do we put it into action? And I get to do both parts of that. I'm not responsible for implementing it. I am responsible for saying, here's what we've learned from this very careful, quite formal academic research. Here's how we translate that into practice. It's not just financial inclusion. One of the other topics that I study is how people's social networks mediate the decisions that they make in other aspects of their life. So an example of that is that social norms around sharing money can make it very difficult for people to save up. So if you have cash in your pocket and somebody who is in your network, in your family or a close friend, is really desperate for money, it's very hard to say no. It's kind of socially unacceptable in many communal societies where I'm working to say no to that. So that means that instead of saving up and making an investment, you wind up not kind of giving that money away or losing track of that money. And so we look at how can we help people save up while still meeting their obligations to their community. We look at social networks in other contexts. I'm working with a very large NGO and now the public health system in India to try to use people's social networks to improve identification and outreach to tuberculosis patients. So what I get to do is to use the formal and empirical tools of economics to learn about the world and make it a better place. And I never in a million years imagined I would wind up here. So I was an undergraduate economics major. I double majored in political science. My econ professors thought I was a little bit lazy, and that they were right, I was. And my political science professors thought I was kind of on the path to graduate school, and maybe they were right too. But I was sure in college that I was not going to go to graduate school. I had been in school my whole life, like all of you, and I wanted to do something. I wanted to graduate and do something that mattered in the world. And so I was very involved in volunteer work and in internships at nonprofits and foundations, but not in research. And I took the classes that were required to be an econ major, but not the classes that were required to go on to an econ PhD. So I took calculus in high school, and then I took this math for economists class that was required for the major. Didn't take multivariate, didn't take linear algebra, didn't take differential equations, had never even heard of real analysis. I just did not know what that was. And I graduated, and I applied for jobs at think tanks and at foundations. And the night before I actually graduated, I'm going out to dinner with my parents, and they're pounding on my door because I'm late for dinner, and I'm on the phone finally getting my first job offer. And so I didn't get that job offer literally until the night before I got my degree. And that job was at a think tank in Washington, D.C. It took till the last minute, but it was my dream job. I was working at a think tank called the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. And I was working on unemployment insurance and welfare reform. And it was an incredible experience. I got to think about issues that were really important. I got to interact with people who were really smart. And I got to do work that felt like it mattered immediately. So it's hard to believe now, but there was also a recession in kind of 2001, 2002. And we were really thinking a lot about extended unemployment benefits. And I was involved in coming up with estimates of the number of people who would receive benefits or run out of benefits under different programs. My job involved writing lots of short policy briefs, attending hearings, helping the staff of various congressional committees come up with the estimates of the number of people who would run out of benefits under the policies that their bosses were sponsoring or co-sponsoring, help prepare people for asking questions in these committees. I spent a lot of time talking to the press. I got really good at working with Excel. I got really good about writing short policy pieces about economics, and it felt like what I did mattered. I loved it. And then it was time to move on, because this is the kind of job you do for 2 years. And I wanted to come back and do the same thing, but be better at it. So what I did was I applied to master's degrees in public policy and in economics. And I didn't get into any of the econ programs I applied to. I applied to LSE, I applied to Oxford, didn't get into any of them. And in hindsight, it's not a surprise, because remember all those math classes I didn't take? I wasn't prepared for those programs. And my grades in the math classes weren't as good as my grades in the econ classes weren't as good as my grades in the political science classes. But I did get into some of the public policy programs. And those programs were a better fit for my profile at the time. I was a good writer. I had been working on public policy. Those applications required writing a policy memo, and I'd been writing like 4 of those a week for the last 2 years. So I was good at that. And I went to the Woodrow Wilson School, which is the public policy program at Princeton University. And it's both an outstanding program and a very well-funded program. And so at that point, I was able to go to a program that was going to provide funding rather than require me writing a check every semester. So that was, that's a real consideration. And while I was there, to be honest, I was really frustrated the first semester. I felt like I'd left behind this job that I was good at and I cared about, and I was sitting in a classroom again, and I was answering problem sets again. And I was sort of recreating skills that I learned on the job. But I started doing RA work for a couple of my professors. And that RA work both let me develop a new set of skills and understand the difference between policy research and academic research. And one way to think about that difference is that in policy research, we care about literally looking at the feasible set of policy options now and saying what would be the effect of these policies? Which is the policy that is going to be most successful in achieving a certain goal? In more academic research, we kind of step back and we say, well, how do people make decisions given this environment, given these constraints? And I liked that. I really liked the opportunity to come at this from a more agnostic perspective and try to say, let's understand people's behavior and then build up from that to what policies might help them achieve better outcomes. So I continued to learn and get better at using Stata, the statistical programming package that's common for applied microeconomics. I took more statistics classes, and then I talked to someone at one of the economists at the Federal Reserve Bank in Boston into letting me do one of their graduate student internships, one of their dissertation internships, the 2 years between my master's degree. And I went and I wrote a paper and I had a fabulous time, and I kept in touch with my advisors from Princeton over that summer. And I got back to campus that fall and they said, so let's talk about where you're applying to PhD programs. And I said, what? Like, applying to what? And they were like, Jess, anybody who has this much fun with Stata should be doing a PhD. And I still thought they were crazy, but I figured I'd indulge them. So I applied to a bunch of jobs. And I applied to the Presidential Management Fellowship, which was I don't actually know if it still exists. It was at the time a kind of a track into sort of technical government positions. And I applied to PhD programs. And I talked to my advisors about the fact that I was a good student in the policy program and I was taking the hardest classes it offered, but I hadn't been such a great student as an undergrad and I hadn't taken all this math. And they said, well, one way that, you have to convince the admissions committee you can pass the first year courses in the PhD. And the first year courses in a PhD program are a little bit like applied math. They don't look anything like the micro or macroeconomics that you do in undergraduate courses. They are much more formal. Micro looks a lot more like a course in real analysis than it does like a course in intermediate microeconomics. And so they said, well, one way that you could convince the admissions committees that you can handle this material is you could take the class now. So why don't you try taking, there's people laughing because it turns out that was a terrible idea. So I tried as a master's student to take the first semester of the PhD courses. And in some ways that's not crazy. If I'd gotten into a program, that's what I would have done the next year. In other ways, it was completely insane. The first class began with the professor writing this backwards E for there exist, and then preferences, which is like a kind of a curvy inequality sign, ST, such that, and I was already lost. And I'm looking at the board, and I'm looking at that backwards E, and I'm thinking, I wonder if he's dyslexic. Why is that E backwards? And everybody else is taking notes and starting to do problem sets, and that kind of set things up. And that was sort of how the semester went. I got a 13 out of 100 on the first midterm. And I went to C.C. Rouse, who is now the dean of the policy school at the Woodrow Wilson School, who was my advisor, and I was crying, and I said, I can't do this. And she said a couple of things that were really important. The first thing she said is, you're going to have to. You can do this. You're just not ready to. But you're going to have to figure out how, right? And the second thing she said is, but this isn't what you're going to do in the rest of your job. That you have to learn this material as the basis for the background for the research that you'll do. But I don't solve problem sets like this ever. This is not how I do research. It's not what I do in my day-to-day work. But you got to learn it to get to the next step. And so then we stepped back. And I took that class pass-fail, and the professor very graciously let me pass rather than fail. And then after I had submitted all of my PhD applications, I took real analysis. And I took the math classes that I needed. And I just put in a ton of time. I solved every single problem in Thomas's calculus, which is a like 800 and something page textbook. And I had taken lots of calculus by that point, but I had really sort of figured out how to get the right answer and not figured out what calculus meant. And I went back and figured out, really like thought about what it meant. And then I took these math classes and I sat there with the undergrad math majors and wondered at how they were doing this, but I worked really hard and I figured it out because it's not insurmountable. It's just something that I had to put a lot of time into. I asked for a lot of help. I got tutors. I went to office hours all the time, but I learned the material. And when the PhD acceptances came out, I had gotten into a number of programs, definitely not the one at Princeton, because the guy who taught that math class, who was not dyslexic as it turns out, said, you know, I just have no reason to believe you're going to pass my class. And I was like, yeah, fair play. And, you know, not that unexpected. But I wound up going to the University of Michigan. My plan when I started my PhD was that I would study labor economics and I would focus on understanding especially community college and community college as a gateway to higher education in the United States. And I got to Michigan and first year was like really hard, but because I'd worked so hard on the math and because I knew that it was going to be hard, and I set up a disciplined study schedule and meetings with study groups, it was okay. You know, it was doable. It was just really hard work. And then I got to the fun part, which starts second year, when you get to take the classes that are particularly in your field. And I took labor and I loved it, but I also started taking development economics classes. And I had really never thought that much about development economics. I'm American, I grew up in the US, I felt like my comparative advantage was in understanding domestic social policy. But it turns out that maybe my real comparative advantage is in being willing to invest the time in learning about local institutions, local norms, and thinking about those as constraints that affect people's economic decision making and people's behavior. And so I wound up focusing more on development economics. I spent the summer after my second year in the PhD program in Malawi. My advisor bought me a plane ticket. He gave me the phone number of a taxi driver who had overcharged him by about a factor of, I don't know, 11 or 12 on his trip to Malawi. I arrived and kind of dove into setting up and managing a field team. And it was a fabulous experience for me because not only was I doing research, I was learning firsthand about the experience of trying to get work done in a developing country. What were the constraints? And I kept going back. I spent about 2.5 years in Malawi over the course of 6 years in grad school. I developed relationships with implementing partners, with the government, with NGOs that have really led to my research down the line, have furthered my research agenda. I conducted my own experiments. I supervised undergraduate students and even younger graduate students as interns. And I fell in love with doing this sort of research. I still didn't think I was going to become a professor. I still thought I was going to go back and do public policy. But the more I looked at the job options available to me, the more I thought, I want to have the flexibility to keep pursuing this totally unfettered research agenda. That's whatever I find interesting, important, I get to study. And I wanted to get to teach and advise and mentor students. And so for me, that sort of combination of things was most available in the academic track. And so I went through the academic job market, which isn't an experience unto itself that I'd be happy to talk about at some other time, and had a number of offers and wound up at the University of Maryland for 2 reasons, really. One, the environment around research and the excitement about talking about research with your colleagues was exactly all the things that I loved at Michigan. And 2, I wanted to teach at a public university. And I feel very strongly about the opportunity and the privilege of teaching at a public university. And I get to do things like this. So in addition to my research and my teaching, I run a program called Promoting Achievement and Diversity in Economics, which is a small pipeline program at University of Maryland, College Park. I advise students through the School of Behavioral and Social Sciences Summer Research Initiative. And one thing that working in developing countries has really made very salient to me is the importance of having many, many voices setting the research agenda. I learn so much from my field teams in Malawi or Uganda or India about what questions I should ask, both big picture and like literally when I'm writing the survey. If I want to know who you talk to about important issues in your life, what question I should ask, what words I should use to ask those questions. I learn from the experiences of the people around me what the answers might actually mean, right? The way that we interpret information depends on our experiences, on our background. And so having people with different experience than me help me figure out what to make of the data that we get, the answers that we get, is incredibly important to doing a good job of being a development economist as an outsider. And it makes very clear to me the importance of having more diverse voices setting the research agenda in general. And so I get to be a part of all of those things by being an academic. And I think it's awesome. And I'm very, very glad to have the opportunity to talk to you about this. And I'd be happy to answer questions later, but I know there's lots of other people who have great information for you too. Great.
I'll just put this to myself. So often when people talk about why they decided to major in economics, it's typically because they've taken a great high school course or because they had a good college first-year professor. And my entry point into economics was a little bit different. And so I'll take you through that before kind of describing what I do in my work at the International Monetary Fund and how it connects with you. So it started in 1994. And I know what you're thinking when you look at this. My fashion sense as a young person was incredible. I peaked at that age, clearly. But other things were happening in 1994. So apartheid had just ended in South Africa, and my father was South African and raised in exile here in the US, and my mother was Guyanese from South America. Around this time, they also felt like I was living too sheltered a life. I was raised in the Midwest, and so they wanted me to go out there into the world and spend summers on and off with my respective families in South Africa and Guyana. And so I did that. And so some summers I would spend in Durban, South Africa, on the coast of the Indian Ocean, and then other summers I would spend in Brooklyn, New York. So not in Guyana. That's because all of my Guyanese family ended up living in Brooklyn, New York. And so it was this back and forth, this constant back and forth, that really set the agenda, if you will, that set the scene for me being interested in several different questions. And boy, did I have a lot of questions. So for instance, I wanted to know, why did my entire Guyanese family live in Brooklyn, New York? I also wanted to know, when we traveled to South Africa, we'd sometimes have to bring some toiletries and some ibuprofen for some aunts, and other aunts lived in mansions. And so there really was a question of what is causing inequalities, both within countries and across countries. And really this is the heart of a lot of economics, even to today. Of course, at the time, I did not have very many answers. And how many of you are first-gen or second-gen Americans in the room? So quite a few. So as you know, asking your parents these types of questions, especially if they are foreign, it's a very American thing to ask these things of elders. And so I did not get very, very good answers when I was young. But the spark was lit. I was very interested in economics from a very early age, and I had a sense that I was going to go into policy for sure. So that brings us to today. I am currently a macroeconomist at the International Monetary Fund, and we can talk more about the details of my path afterwards if you're interested. But in terms of this is Madame Lagarde, by the way, up here in the corner, our fearless leader at the IMF. We're very excited about her. But in terms of my day-to-day work, half of it is on policy, which is very abstract as a term. So what does that mean? Well, in the IMF context, that means that I travel to countries, in particular in my case, Fiji, and I meet with the local authorities after assessing their macro framework and the reforms that they're doing, and I discuss with the central bank governor or the minister of finance what they're implementing and whether we think they're on the right track and where the IMF can help. in terms of doing analysis. So that's half the work. The other half of the work is research. I get to pursue my own research agenda as it relates to international macro, which is a very, very broad space. Now, one thing I've learned at the front is that there's still so many unanswered questions. You might get this sense, especially as an undergrad, as you're reading through the textbooks, that we know everything, that everything has been answered. Well, it has not at all. And there's a few reasons for this, but in particular in macro, it's because we can't run experiments on countries, or we're not supposed to, at least. We cannot helicopter in bags of money and see what happens if we drop it in. We can't turn on and off certain monetary policies just because we're interested in seeing what happens. So that's one thing. So we're not a scientific lab, so we can't run experiments. The second thing is that we don't know how to measure certain things that we know have impact. And that's really the focus of my work, is that I measure hard to capture phenomena. So what does that mean? So right now, we're in the midst of some trade policy uncertainty. So the President of the United States is kind of pushing China in a direction of a trade war right now. But at the same time, yesterday he said that he wanted to join up with 11 other countries on another trade agreement. So the question becomes is like, okay, we know that this uncertainty is probably having some effect, this volatility, but what effect? And is this uncertainty higher than it was last year, or is it lower? How can we actually put a number on that? And so to that point, what I do is I try to actually put numbers to these different hard to measure phenomena. And I'm sure you can imagine in your heads other hard to measure phenomena. For example, we know that sexism is everywhere. How do we actually put a number on that? We know that racism is everywhere. How do we put a number on that? Is it higher? Is it lower than last year? What are these changes? And so the approaches that I bring to that leverage big data. And specifically, I'm an expert in text analysis. And I use something that's actually completely ubiquitous. I use newspapers. So I mine data using complex search algorithms on newspapers, namely almost 1 billion articles across the world from over 36,000 sources from 1985 to today. So I'm able, for instance, to tell you that trade policy uncertainty, yes, is very high right now relative to last year. My current work at the IMF is on the topic of corruption. Again, a hard to capture phenomena. Corrupt actors don't like for their corrupt activities to be shown. So how do we actually get in a measure that's not, by the way, just the opinions of a group of people about whether, for example, South Africa has high or low corruption in any given year? How do we actually say corruption is actually higher versus lower than last year? And so I use this text analysis in this way. And I'll just give you a brief example instead of going in deeply into the research findings to give you some sense of what these end up looking like. So this is Brazil and the corruption measure that I've created for Brazil from 1995 to 2017. And so we see a couple spikes in 2005 as well as more recently where multiple presidents have been taken down and there's been World Cup and Petrobras scandals. And so from this, for example, again, I'm able to put numbers to say what's happening right now in Brazil is much worse relative to what happened in 2005 when, again, there a finance and prime minister were also implicated. I can also say, based on the nature, i.e. sports-related corruption, it's potentially worse or not as bad as other types of corruption. So it really allows you to kind of finely tune the effect of these big, hard-to-measure phenomena in terms of outcomes. So I'll leave it there, and again, I'm really happy to talk about my research more and text analysis and using big data and machine learning afterwards. But I want to leave you with some advice. So first, I took my questions very seriously from a young age. Those questions about inequality, those questions about why Brooklyn looked different from Johannesburg, I took them very seriously. And I took finding the answers to those questions even more seriously, which is how I ended up as a macroeconomist. Take more math classes. I know that I am preaching to the choir. I know you hear it from your president, from your faculty, but take more math classes. And Jess really spoke to this as well. As often as you can, get an extra math class in. I can't impress upon you what the future is going to look like in terms of work and the fact that quantitative skills will be absolutely necessary in terms of having competitive edge. And that doesn't matter what industry you're going into. Increasingly, even in other social sciences like sociology and political science, math classes are becoming a requirement even going into those graduate programs as well. So don't avoid, just lean into it, okay? And then Fourth, ask for help. So this is my website. You can see some more of my research. But importantly, you can also get my contact details on there. I am happy to go back and forth with you via email on questions about applying to grad programs, whether a policy degree versus going into the econ program is better. Is a business school program better for you versus something else? Should I do an internship somewhere? Can I get contact information for HR at the IMF? Please, please, please reach out. We're happy to help, especially if it's via email, because I can do that quite quickly. And then finally, trust that your voice and your opinion and the lens that you're bringing this, trust that these things are unique. I think often, again, especially as undergrads, there was this sense of there's nothing new that I can bring to the literature. My professors know everything. Everything has been answered. Well, it has not been answered. And in particular, the ideas that you have, me coming from a very international background, I see the world completely differently, and that has been my competitive edge. And all of you have some component that brings a new lens to a question that needs answering. And as Jess also alluded to, we want a competition of ideas within the discipline, and that's the only way that we're going to be able to solve these broader questions. So I'll leave it there and pass it off to my colleagues from Brookings. Great.
So now for something completely different. First, I wanted to get a sense of who you are. So how many people here are in the first 2 years at UMBC? And how many of you are in your second 2 years at UMBC? And how many people are already majoring in economics? Okay, that's terrific, thanks.
Awesome.
So my name is David Wessel. I'm director of something called the Hutchins Center on Fiscal and Monetary Policy at the Brookings Institution, which is a big think tank. How many people here have heard of Brookings? Okay, good. Just to be completely honest, I am not an economist, although I tell people I could play one on TV. I majored in economics in college for the reason that a lot of people did, is I thought I'd major in political science. The first political science class I took was boring. The first economics class I took was terrific. I majored in economics. I went to work for a newspaper right out of college and spent 35 years as a reporter, most of that time writing about economics. I came to Brookings 4 years ago to set up the center, the point of which is to improve the quality of fiscal and monetary policy and public understanding of it. And so that goes to the wide range from commissioning papers on topics in economics about fiscal and monetary policy to building a computer game on the federal budget, www.fiscalship.org if you want to play it, please, to help people understand better the federal budget. This is Marcy Cabea.
Hi.
She's
You guys hear me?
an RA at Brookings, and I thought what we could talk about a little bit is maybe you want to get a PhD or a master's, maybe you don't, but it's not the only thing to do the day you graduate from college, and a lot of people in our experience find that it's better not to go to graduate school right away, but to try some things out for a couple of years, as Jessica did. And so we wanted to explain a little bit about what that means to a think tank like the Brookings Institution, which is a big 100-year-old think tank in Washington with many different activities, but a big chunk of which is economics. So Marcy, why don't you start telling people a little bit about where did you go to high school, what did you do in college, what did you do before you came to
Yeah. So I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Indianapolis, and I went to this huge public high school that was almost 5,000 kids. They gave us maps, it was just massive. But there, I ended up being so interested in economics, in math, but also in the public space, right? Politics and the way the government functions in the United States. And as I was looking to apply to different universities, I was trying to decide, okay, do I want to go more on the math side and the statistics side, because I really enjoyed taking those classes, or do I want to go more in the political science, government realm? And I always thought that you had to kind of separate them. I wasn't really aware that they could merge or you could have careers that blended them. So I ended up looking around, and a program that popped out to me and I fell in love with was at Cornell University in their School of Industrial and Labor Relations that was focused on labor economics and labor law. And for someone like me, where I was like, I can't tell if I want to do just political science, it really combined a lot of those together. And I ended up focusing more on the labor econ and the statistics side, but then I had some piqued interest in the health space, and I'd never really taken courses in it, but right before I was about to graduate, ended up having an internship in Massachusetts at the Department of Public Health, but in their statistics area. So looking at epidemiology and the way that intersects with the workplace, and figured when I graduated, I want to go into something that marriages the two of them. I ended up coming to Brookings and working in their Center for Health Policy, and have gone completely into the health economics realm and have loved it. It's a wonderful way that it marriages looking at the numbers, and especially this past summer where you're looking at the ACA repeal and replace, and so we were doing some really cool analysis looking at what does this look like for premiums, or even more broadly, how does this affect the way physicians are reimbursed? And so asking those questions, and me not having that public health background, I thought I can't really add much to this. I'm more a numbers person, and being able to see how, yes, all of this economic analysis really does have effects on the way that the healthcare system runs, and being able to do a lot of partnerships with other folks in the public health space. And I've been able to broaden it a little bit.
You came to Brookings 4 years ago.
I came to Brookings 4 years ago, yeah.
Right.
So I went straight out of undergrad. I graduated from Cornell, came down to Brookings, and it's been a blast. And I'm in the same, not in the same exact fiscal monetary policy center, but in domestic economics as well.
So give the people here some example of something you're working on.
Yeah. So right now we're doing an interesting marriage of the way that housing funds and healthcare funds are being braided and blended. And so right now you see where we have all the spending in the medical space, right? And you're not always seeing the medical or health outcomes that you want to see, but looking at the way other countries are going into social spending and housing and education and seeing health outcomes there. So we're trying to replicate a lot of that type of work and marriage that
Talk
together.
a little bit about the Bon Secours.
Yeah, even, I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with the Bon Secours health system in Baltimore. But they do some really interesting work where it's a nonprofit hospital system, but the way nonprofit hospitals work, obviously they want to keep their nonprofit status with the IRS, so they have requirements on investing in the community in other spaces. And so they realize that a lot of the way hospitals are sometimes be penalized when they have folks who come into the ER and then keep being readmitted. And so they have penalties for that. And one way that they found out to mitigate it was a lot of the folks who come into the ER are homeless. And so they realized that there were some abandoned homes in the nearby blocks. They decided to invest in those, which is unique for a hospital because normally you think we're only going to invest in medical or clinical spending, but thinking outside of the box and investing in housing, those folks are able to then be stabilized and they're not coming back into the ER as much. They are seeing their health outcomes improve, and you're reaping all these health benefits. And also just on the mission side of being in the community and wanting to be involved and doing something broader than just looking at the bottom line, right? We're stabilizing families, stabilizing communities, and that has effects on children, families, their parents, their grandparents. And so it's a really great model.
What are you're working with Stuart Butler?
I'm working with Stuart Butler, and
what's your role in this?
yeah, our role is we look at the analysis of the business models, and then we connect and meet with the different stakeholders on the local level and figure out what are their challenges, what are their successes, how can we interact and connect them with other folks in other cities, but also translate that on the federal level and see what are the policies that are going on, how can we be sort of an intermediary between the two and translate what's going on at the federal level government, at the state local levels, and do a lot more impact. So it's an interesting marriage of the econ research, but the policy side too.
Right, so the point of Brookings, when it does what it intends to do, is to marry the science of economics with the art of policy. And so while some economics, there's some economists who never got beyond the real analysis. They still think they're doing equations.
Yeah.
We don't have very many of them at Brookings. We're interested in people who want to make the world a better place and who want to use the platform that comes with a big prominent think tank to do that. But so we have a lot of PhD economists, but we also have a very steady stream of young people, many of whom are in between undergrad and graduate school. So there's kind of two ways to think about it. There are people who come as interns, some of them part-time, although in my program we found it doesn't work very well. Some for 12 weeks, either spring, fall, or summer. We have some people who come for credit. We have some people who get paid, but we don't have anything in between. Either you're getting credit or you're getting paid. We don't believe in the freebie thing because the boss's daughter needs a summer internship. And so we have a pretty organized program in that. And then we have research assistants, some of whom come right out of college, and some of whom have worked somewhere for a couple of years and then come to Brookings for a couple of years. A wide variety of work that they do, from hardcore number crunching, data, real analysis stuff, to helping us write plain English summaries of papers we commissioned, because the last thing in the world you want is for the PhD who wrote the paper to try and write the plain English summary.
Yeah, and that's a big part of what I do. So a lot of it's doing the number crunching, but then also dissecting it and making it accessible to the public. So we'll sometimes be working on long-term 80-page papers, or we'll be doing a quick blog post, something that we're pitching around to everyone. And I was along the lines of where I'm 4 years out of school, so I completely understand the stress of figuring out, do you take some time, do you get into the workforce, or do you go straight into a program? I knew that I couldn't decide if I wanted to do just health policy, just economics, and so I figured I'm going to take 4 years, go back into the workplace, narrow down what it is I want to focus on. And so I'm at that point now where I'm like, I'm ready to go to school again, know exactly what I want to focus on. So I'm in the process of looking at health economics programs for graduate school. And again, we have folks who come to work with us who go straight through, or folks who've taken 3 to 5 years out.
So we should let the Fed have their 10 minutes
Yep.
of fame.
Happy to answer questions.
I'm David Wilcox. I'm Director of the Domestic Economics Division at the Fed. I've heard only one thing this afternoon that I disagree with. Professor Goldberg said she has the coolest job in the world. I feel privileged. I just have to assert, though, I have the coolest job in the world. Why is it the coolest job in the world? Partly because I view a big part of my job is to inspire 350 other people to do great work. I also have the opportunity to come and be inspired about the field of economics and be renewed all over again about why economics was my calling and my passion and my life's work. And this event is a great example of that. What's going on at UMBC, it would be hard to overstate what is happening here. It's a really exciting enterprise, and I just want to offer congratulations to Professor Mitch and his colleagues for making something really extraordinary happen here. We too are interested in making the world a better place at the Federal Reserve. We happen to do that in part through the conduct of monetary policy and through research on an amazing spectrum of topics closely related to monetary policy and perhaps surprisingly distant from the conduct of monetary policy. I have 4 of my colleagues here today, 3 of whom are going to participate in explaining to you what we do at the Fed. And the 4th, John Allegro, will be here for the networking session at the end, and he's a specialist in our hiring process. So if you want to know how to apply for a job, what the procedure is, John Allegro is the person. John, would you just raise your hand? John is the person to speak with. Daniel Villar, I believe, is going to kick it off for us. Is that correct? Ephraim Burke is going to kick it off. There we go. This is an unrehearsed performance.
Thank you, David. First of all, I just wanted to say I'm actually a UMBC alumnus, so go UMBC. And just wanted to say it's a pleasure to be back here. Thank you, Professor Mitch, Professor Thomas, for a wonderful academic experience over here. My story, I'll tell you a little bit about, what brought me to economics. I'm not that far into it, so my story may not be, might not have all the detail of everybody else. But what happened was I came to college, and there were a lot of things that interested me. And as has been said earlier today, sometimes you feel that you sort of have to go one of 2 ways. You're either a STEM person, a math and sciences person, or you are an arts and humanities person. You sort of have to pick between the 2. And sort of by fluke, but really, is there such thing as a fluke? I took macroeconomics, principles of macro, my first semester actually with Jamie Falcon. I don't know if anybody's ever taken him here. He was excellent. He made the economics interesting, relevant, the idea, talking about opportunity costs, which we weigh every single day in every decision that we make, talking about larger scale issues like inflation and unemployment. And then as you get more exposure to economics, you realize that there are fields like developmental economics, health economics, labor economics, where there's just so many there's so many different applications of this, of all of this. And I left that class thinking, hey, you know what? Maybe I at least ought to minor in this. I ended up doing the double math econ major over here, and as I took more classes, I was more interested, and really, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do after college. Figured that it might be good to get some work experience in before possibly going to grad school. And I Googled research assistant positions. At the Federal Reserve, I thought about the Fed. I was in school in Baltimore. We're only about an hour away from Washington. And I spoke to somebody at the Federal Reserve, and that really got the ball rolling. And I'm fortunate enough to be working here and doing very interesting work. What we do as RAs, just sort of in short, depending on which section you really end up being in, David is the director of the Division of Research and Statistics. I am in monetary affairs. What we do, my subsection is called money market analysis. We analyze money markets, short-term debt, and that's really the juice of the financial system. So we are looking at, when you hear about the Federal Reserve having implemented unusual policy at the end of the Great Recession and possibly trying to steer more towards what we had beforehand, we're involved in that type of work, and it's fascinating to be involved in that. It's fascinating to apply coding and other quantitative skills to try to solve these problems. And there are other sections that are involved in other work. Jess can tell you about the work that she's done and that she's doing just a moment, and Daniel can tell you about all the work that he does as an economist. But in short, I would just say economics is a fascinating field. It's really got, I feel, the best blend of everything. As has been discussed, you get to tackle interesting, relevant problems and apply those tools to to everything. So thank you very much for this opportunity. And now I think I'm about to Jess.
Okay, can you hear me? Good. So my name is Jess Baker. I am from California. My family is from a Mexican farm working family from the Central Valley, from all of different parts of Mexico. And I went to public schools in San Diego. I actually went to community college before I went to Cal State San Marcos and then San Diego State for my master's. So yay for public universities. I am a very proud graduate and longtime student of public schools. And yeah, so my path into economics, as an undergrad, I studied sociology and women's studies. That was kind of where I got into I started my interest in inequality. And I wanted to try to make a more compelling argument for why inequality is important, why it exists, why we should acknowledge it and try to do something about it. And I felt that economics gave me that supplemental, extra that I needed. And so while I was, after Cal State San Marcos, I wasn't 100% sure of how to get to a PhD in economics or how to, follow that path. So I ended up working for a law firm as a paralegal for about 2 years. Wasn't sure if I wanted to maybe do law, put away bad guys, that type of thing. Turns out I missed economics a lot. One of my last classes in undergrad was law and econ, so that was kind of why I was on the border. But I missed economics a lot, so I decided to apply for a master's. That's why I went to San Diego State. And while I was at San Diego State, I took part in the American Economic Association summer program, which is a very great pathway if you're a minority student. It's for women and other minorities who want to do economics but just don't really have that understanding of how to bridge that gap. There's an advanced track and there's a foundations track depending on what level you're at. So because I was a master's student, I did advanced, but don't be intimidated. It's for a range of students. You get a lot of research experience there, and that was actually how I learned about the Federal Reserve. They came and recruited to us, and so I ended up applying and getting a position, and here I am. I I work in the labor markets section. So I don't know if you're familiar, but the dual mandate of the Federal Reserve is to monitor inflation and then also, pay attention to unemployment rates. And so that's a big part of what I do. The kind of succinct way to put my job into words is I collect and visualize data for my economists, and they do their analysis and give their story to the board. So so that's pretty much my story and kind of my pathway. I very much agree with your last point that who you are informs your research, and that you need to hold on to that. The experience that you come from makes you very unique in that way. And so there are so many questions in economics that you can tackle just based on like where you come from. So that's something that's like always important to keep in mind, always something that will inspire you to keep going. And I wanted to kind of give a little plug other than the AEA program. There's a Howard R class that we offer. We call it the Howard R class, but we're opening it up to, or it is open to all colleges within the consortium, and then also UMBC. So there's a sign-up sheet that we're going to pass around, so feel free to put your information on that, and we will reach out to you with info about the R class. R is comparable to Stata, sorry to let you know, but it's free actually, it's open source, and so that's kind of the advantage of learning it, is that you'll never have to pay for it. And it's becoming more widely used within the industry, so Stata and R, very comparable, but yeah, if you would like to, that's a Friday class, if you'd like to join, feel free to sign up on the sign-in sheet, and I will hand it off to Daniel.
Thanks, Jess. So can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, so I'm Daniel Villar. I'm an economist at the Fed board. And so we've already heard some great presentations about why it's awesome to be an economist. So I'm going to build just a little bit on that. So first, let me talk a little bit about myself. I'm an economist in the Research and Statistics division in the prices and wages group. So Jess takes care of Jess's group does labor. We have the other half of the Fed's dual mandate. So we look at inflation. I've been at the Fed for about a year and a half. Before that, I did my PhD at Columbia in New York. And so what I wanted to talk a little bit about was first acknowledge that doing a PhD in economics, I've loved it, but there is a significant cost. So Jessica gave us a bit of an illustration of that, and it's true. So there is a cost. It's a lot of work. It's also a lot of time. It's a big opportunity cost to spend a bunch of time in your 20s, possibly 30s, earning not as much money as you might otherwise earn. So that's the definition of the opportunity cost. But I'm not here to discourage you from doing a PhD. I was about to get that. Yeah, it's like what's this guy talking? Acknowledging the cost. I want to emphasize the payoff. So what do I think has been the payoff to that investment of doing a PhD? And one of the main things is that I think it's a great privilege to have a career, to have a job, doing something that you're really passionate about, something that you really value, and where you clearly see the social value of what you're doing. I think that's the most important thing. That's the most important thing to me about being an economist, with all the tools that you learn doing a PhD. So as Jessica and Sunil already mentioned, you as an economist, in most cases, you have a lot of freedom to choose what kind of research to do, what kinds of questions to pursue. So there are, of course, so many important unanswered questions. No one can answer all of them. No one can even work on all the different important fields. But each of us have specific things that we are interested, that we would really like to learn more about. When you're an economist, you can use statistical tools, numerical tools, conceptual tools really try to learn something important about a significant social question. For me, that was inflation and monetary policy. So I spent a lot of my time in grad school basically rebuilding a really large data set of prices from the late 1970s and early 80s. So I would spend days and days at the Bureau of Labor Statistics in DC reconstructing this data set. And so it might not immediately sound like a very exciting thing, but it was very exciting because based on this data set, I've gotten to do research to improve our understanding of how monetary policy works, of how effectively monetary policy can affect the economy. So we use data on prices from periods of high inflation, higher than it is now, and that's been really helpful in improving our understanding of monetary policy. So it's a lot of work, but that's had a really big payoff for me, understanding monetary policy better. Another thing that I want to emphasize is that beyond just getting to work on something that one finds interesting, as an economist, you also get to become an expert or the expert on something very particular, but something that's very important to you. So when I spent hours at the BLS in DC going through this data, sometimes I thought to myself, I'm the only person who has ever seen this data set or who has ever worked with this type of data. Of course, that's not going to, it's not, so that knowledge isn't going to save the world or going to solve all of our problems, but it is pretty special to get to put in and work into something so that you can really be the expert on something. So that's why I love being an economist. That's why I love being an economist at the Fed. The fit of the Fed's mission with my research is very clear. So because at the Fed, the research, the analysis that I do day to day helps inform the people who make the most important decisions for the economy. So that's why I think being an economist is awesome. And what I want to close with is by saying that to become an economist, the role of mentors is extremely important. So we've already heard a bit about this. No one goes into economics knowing how to navigate the process. Whatever path you end up choosing, whether it's academia, policy work, PhD, non-PhD, you need advice and mentorship from someone to navigate this process, to know the workings of the different institutions and systems and processes that you'll have to go through. And so because mentorship is so important, at the Fed we've actually started a mentoring program called Coffee with an Economist. So this is a program that where a bunch of economists at the Fed sign up for, and we are basically available to meet. So we are paired with individual students, and we meet for a low-key, informal conversation over coffee. I don't drink coffee, but that's okay. We can get something else. And so the idea is basically for us, the economists, to help you answering any questions you might have about applying to grad school or about being an econ major, what classes to take. I could go on for a long time about how important mentors have been in my path in economics, but it's really crucial. So we are very excited about being able to do this and to meet with students like you. So when we're going to pass around the sign-up sheet. So anyone who's interested can fill this out. And just to full disclosure, if you sign up for this, you might get information about the R class.
You will.
Yes, and about the Coffee with an Economist program. So
You get coffee if you go to the art class? Or
that's a good question.
And
No.
I've had a bunch of students sign up
Okay.
for this, and some of them thought it sounded intimidating at first, and they loved it. They just thought it was fabulous. So the feedback has been incredibly positive. You should all do it.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree. We have over 300 PhD economists at the board from all kinds of different specialties with different backgrounds, different interests. So we are very excited to get to meet with you and talk with you. And of course, after all this, I'm happy to talk with any of you and answer any questions you might have. So thanks.
We have one final visitor. Did you want to say a few words?
Yeah, just a couple of words.
Yeah.
My name is Daniel Bunt, and I work on the Joint Economic Committee in Congress as a senior policy advisor. The Joint Economic Committee is a interesting committee in Congress because it has members from both the House and the Senate, and it's a non-legislative committee. So the committee was set up in the 40s post-World War II to study the economy and kind of be complementary to some of these other institutions that we have in the government. Our parallel institution is the Council of Economic Advisors in the White House, and our really only statutory role is to respond to the economic report of the president every year. So other than that response, we have an agenda for hearings that's directed by the chairman or the vice chairman. I work for the vice chairman of the committee, Senator Mike Lee, and the chairmanship switches from the House and the Senate every 2 years. We employ almost 24 economists with masters or PhDs, depending on the level of work that we need at the time. You do, general research, and I work particularly on something that Senator Mike Lee has set up called the Social Capital Project. So we were talking a little bit earlier about things that are difficult to measure, but we know that are important. And one of those things is we know that the value of culture and cultural trust and the strength of local institutions and the value of those institutions and inclusivity and things like that really matter, but it's very difficult to measure. So we've taken up this short-term project. It'll probably last 2 to 4 years depending on how the majorities go this fall. But it's an interesting project, and a little bit about myself as well, since everyone else has shared a little bit of their background. So I did a business major in undergrad at a small Baptist university in South Carolina, which is where I'm from. And as part of that university, I was exposed to mission trips and traveled around the world, and I decided that I wanted to go to grad school in Budapest, Hungary. Very narrow decision, and that I wanted to study economics. And there were a couple of different opportunities, and some of the folks that I knew there were like, hey, there's this university over there that you should look into, and I was able to get into a university called Central European University, and I actually studied under a University of Michigan professor, Gabor Kezdi, who taught me econometrics and program evaluation. And through that master's experience, I decided that, so my wife went over there with me, and we were trying to figure out whether we wanted to stay in Europe or if we wanted to move back to the United States. And different things led to us moving back to the United States, and I was able to get a job in Congress in the fall of 2012. And I worked in members' personal offices, but always with a focus in economics. And one of the most important things for a job working on economic policy on the Hill is fluency in the economic literature. You're probably not going to be able to specialize like a PhD at the Fed might be able to do, but you will be able to engage with think tanks, with academics, with policymakers, and the more fluent you are in the academic literature, the more power you have in your job, because so much of the politics is informed by let's say, less than robust research. That the extent to which you can inform the debate with robust research really helps. And that requires, kind of like the theme, that requires a lot of good work in academics, so that, in your academic career, so that when you're in a job evaluating a policy or a proposal and you're looking at the academic literature to figure out, is this a positive or negative impact at the basic or at the baseline or something else, that you're able to tell your boss, that you not only understand the economic literature, but how the policy fits into that. So happy to chat afterwards, and thank you, Dr. Mach, for hosting this and allowing me to join. Thank you.